Hi, I'm Frank Diamond, the managing editor of Infection Control Today, where we're trying to give infection preventionists and other healthcare professionals the information they need to battle COVID-19 and other dangerous pathogens. Those non-COVID pathogens are still out there and can still cause harm, as IPs too well know. Joining me today is Melinda Benedict, a certified infection preventionist, among other things. And among those other things is the fact that Ms. Benedict is the global senior manager of infection prevention at Olympus, an endoscope manufacturing company that is knowledgeable about endoscope sampling and culturing from its own recent experience conducting those kind of studies. Ms. Benedict believes that infection preventionists will more and more be pulled in to help design and even operate scope sampling and culturing programs. After all, IPs are always on the lookout for troublesome pathogens. Ms. Benedict, thanks for being with us here today at Infection Control Today.
Thanks for having me.
So in what ways do you see infection preventionists becoming more involved with sampling and culturing in the future?
So I think any infection preventionist who has oversight of an area in their facility that uses flexible endoscopes, reusable flexible endoscopes, will, if they aren't already involved in this, will eventually be pulled into this area. Really the reason for that is patient safety. So infection preventionists are always cognizant of patient safety, and that is really their role in the hospital. So the purpose of an endoscope sampling and culturing program is really to detect possible microbial contamination on an endoscope. And while this is most often performed on a type of endoscope that performs specialty procedures called a duodenoscope, and a lot of facilities that use duodenoscopes are interested in sampling and culturing, it really is possible to do this with any type of endoscope. And it may seem simple enough, this endoscope sampling and culturing kind of protocol, but it really is a multi-step process. And above all, it's a learning experience. If you haven't ever done sampling or had experience with this, it really takes a multidisciplinary team to come together and design and manage and implement these types of programs. And infection preventionists, I always recommend that a facility pull in their IPs, because the IPs really fill a knowledge gap that other areas and other people in your facility may not have, especially when it comes to microbiology. What are harmful bugs? What are bugs that may be environmental and not so harmful? And really how to take a laboratory report and read it and analyze it and understand what it says. And I think that's why IPs are so important in this type of program.
Duodenoscopes, there's been some breakthroughs recently making them disposable. You said, as you mentioned, it's very difficult to sanitize these instruments after they've been used. And I guess it seems like there might be a trend toward making some of them more disposable. You see that happening?
So that stems from an FDA communication, and they did state that there should be a gradual movement either towards single-use duodenoscopes or duodenoscopes with single-use components. So Olympus has really filled that role. We just came out with a new model that has a disposable end cap that sort of allows the person that is cleaning the duodenoscope to uncover some of the smaller mechanic portions of that scope in order to really get in there and visualize what they're cleaning with a brush, in order to improve human factors really in reprocessing scopes. So at no point does the FDA say you must use a single-use scope. Reusable endoscopes and reprocessing reusable endoscopes using high-level disinfection or sterilization, should a facility have that capability or already be doing that, is still absolutely acceptable. I think another way infection preventionists can really play a role in getting more involved in their endoscopy department is by going in and seeing if they can help with the reprocessing of reusable endoscopes, whether that's a duodenoscope or any other model. You know, there are opportunities to go in and audit that process to make sure all of the reprocessing technicians are really using best practices as far as society guidelines and the manufacturer's IFUs.
Do you see this happening, that hospitals are more and more thinking about inviting infection preventionists onto the team that cleans, that sterilizes these instruments? And who actually sterilizes the instruments now?
So I really see, if the departments that aren't handling endoscopes aren't inviting the IPs in, I think the IPs should really be proactive in seeing if they can reach out to help. Right now, as far as who's actually cleaning, reprocessing, disinfecting, decontaminating endoscopes, it really seems to be different depending on what facility you go into. So you have ambulatory surgical centers where everything is really right there, centralized in one usually smaller location where the reprocessing is done by a tech or a nurse or maybe a medical assistant kind of right next door in a room, all the way through to larger hospital systems that may be sending their flexible endoscopes down into central sterile, SPD, to be reprocessed, or even off-site. We've heard of some larger facilities really centering all of their medical device reprocessing into one facility that may be down the street or across town, and those endoscopes have to move over to that location. One of the benefits in doing something like that is that you centralize all of these same types of tasks, and you can have a more specialized workforce really doing those kinds of duties and becoming their experts in their jobs in cleaning and reprocessing medical devices.
What you just described to me, to this layman, sounds a little haphazard. I'm not saying that, I mean, some institutions probably do it well, you know them and do a great job of it, but it doesn't seem to be a national guideline for how exactly to do this.
So there are actually several national guidelines. They're more professional societies will put out guidelines on endoscope reprocessing. And facilities really should be not only taking into account the endoscope manufacturer's IFU or the instructions for use, we call them an IFU, and also the manuals on how to use any other equipment they may be using during that reprocessing journey. So there are smaller pieces of equipment like flushing pumps, or they're actually automated endoscope reprocessors. You can think of them as endoscope washing machines. So all of those instructions need to be built into the internal protocol at the facility level, but then also we always recommend that the facility follow at least one professional society guideline specifically written about endoscope reprocessing. And there are 4 or 5 of these, and they are very similar in nature. The CDC has one. Then we have organizations such as AMI. So they put out a lot of standards and ISO documents on medical device reprocessing and sterilization. They have one specific to endoscope reprocessing. And then you can get more into the societies that really focus in on one type of endoscopy use. For example, SGNA is for gastrointestinal endoscopy. It's their nurses association. You have AORN that has one, that's perioperative nursing, and there are a few others as well. But the one good thing that these society guidelines give you is that they go above and beyond what the endoscope manufacturer suggests. So no matter where you're doing your reprocessing, whether you're in a very small room within your unit and your scope never leaves your unit, or whether you're in a bigger center who's decided to centralize reprocessing and maybe those scopes go to a different department, as long as the best practices that are within not only the instructions for use from the manufacturers, but also in these guidelines you choose to follow, should be being followed. And as long as you can do that logistically and work through that, then I think it doesn't really matter necessarily where the reprocessing is being done physically, but who's doing it. Are they trained? Are you using the correct equipment? Are those people following the steps as they should?
What made you conclude that infection preventionists might be good to have on this? It might be a good idea to have an infection preventionist involved in this. Is that something that you decided from just by traveling to different hospitals and taking a look and seeing how to do it?
Yeah, I think infection preventionists offer a different perspective. Often reprocessing technicians, they're not typically nurses. They're central sterile reprocessing type of employees. And depending on who oversees them, it may be a nurse manager who really focuses on the procedural aspect of endoscopy, or an SPD manager that may have a lot of expertise in medical device manufacture or medical device reprocessing. But the infection preventionist can really go in and almost as a consultant and consult on, is the IFU being followed as written? Are people using good aseptic or sterile techniques should that be needed? And that is something that really comes into play specifically for an endoscope sampling and culturing program, is this idea of, in order to obtain a good sample from an endoscope, because it is a little bit of a logistically difficult process because you're trying to take a microbiological sample from a 5-foot long tube, and depending on who is actually taking the sample, whether they are technicians that may not have ever had good training in aseptic and sterile technique, this is where infection preventionists, because most of them not only have that IP background, but a nursing background or lab background or something similar, can come in as a third party, as a third set of eyes, and really see things from a different perspective and put their unique expertise to use.
Have you actually seen this work on the ground?
Have I seen the endoscope sampling and culturing, or?
Infection preventionists involved in it.
Yes. So Olympus does do sampling and culturing studies out there. We're gearing up for one right now on duodenoscopes. And in many of the facilities that have agreed to work with us on these studies, the infection preventionist is the most integral player in these studies. Yeah.
Is that new, or has that always been the case?
I think it's relatively new in the last few years. I think typically in the past, infection preventionists were very concerned about, operating room sterility, things like catheters and central line infections, things like that, almost population epidemiology within their facility. But I think as the world of endoscopy kind of grows in itself, and concerns tend to pop up over reprocessing of endoscopes. There are studies that are coming out looking at that. I think as a function of that, infection preventionists get pulled in because there is a very large kind of infection prevention idea behind reprocessing medical devices and reusable medical devices, especially a flexible endoscope. So I think it's a natural transition. And I've been to a few APIC conferences over the years, and I have seen a very noticeable increase in the number of lectures and programs specifically geared towards infection preventionists to teach them about flexible endoscopy and reprocessing flexible endoscopes and what that looks like and how they can become involved.
Well, do you think they'll be greeted with open arms, or is there any kind of turf problem here? There's always a turf war somewhere, right?
I know, and that honestly I'm not sure of. I think everybody would like to think that it's a very harmonious relationship between IPs and the departments they oversee, so I am hoping it is like that for everybody.
Any final words for infection preventionists and anybody else who may be watching?
I think, infection preventionists, like I said before, if you're not already involved in your endoscopy department or you haven't been invited in, see if you can get in and just kind of check it out and see what's going on, especially if the reprocessing and cleaning of the scopes is actually done within that clinic. If it's done at another location and you may already be involved in something else there, see if you can take a peek over there. But I think there's a lot of room in endoscope reprocessing for infection preventionists to really come in and offer their really unique perspective and form this multidisciplinary team that is really needed and really helps to promote patient safety.
Melinda Benedict, thank you so much for visiting Infection Control today.
Thank you, Frank.